Hey there, welcome back to Dimension Quest. Back in April of this year, I released a video setting up pfSense on VMware Workstation that's running on my Linux. During the course of that video, I also walked through the steps necessary to create a few different LAN segments that had various firewall rules between the segments that either allowed or disallowed traffic. Well, that was just a simple test setup and showing some firewall settings. So now I'm going to take another step in the direction of actually having this as a home lab under VMware Workstation by adding an ESXi VM to this environment. Now, this is commonly referred to as a nested ESX server, which William Lamb happens to be the go-to guy for most things nested. So if we take a look at his website, there's a particular article here that has a short URL. You can see it here, vmwa.re/nested ESXi, which points to this page. I'll make sure to have the link to this included in the description of this video. Now, as we can see here, we've got all the way up to the latest ESXi 8.0 update to Virtual Appliance, which is the latest version of ESXi 8 as of the recording of this video. We can scroll back and see it goes all the way back to ESXi 6 update 3. So of course, we want to get the ESXi 8 update to Virtual Appliance. And if you hover over the link here, you can see that the URL is actually pointed to VMware's download server. So this OVA is hosted by VMware, and William has simply made these links easily to find and access. So I've already downloaded this OVA and I've imported it into my VMware Workstation, but I have not yet completed one of the prerequisites requirements in order to allow this to work. Okay, so we can see that I've got an ESXi 8.02 VM imported here, and this was from William's link. I've manually set an IP address of 192.168.110.51, which is one of the valid networks in my VMware Workstation environment. So I'll click over to my Ubuntu VM running in VMware Workstation. I'll open up a terminal and I'll try pinging that. Now again, I am expecting a failure here because I did not do a prerequisite. So let's try pinging 192.168.110.51 and we will see that I am not getting replies. And this is because in order to run ESX as a virtual machine, you must have the network that it's attached to with Promiscuous mode enabled. So in order to do that on VMware Workstation running on Linux, we'll need to follow a KB article. So let me go ahead and grab the link to that. And let's pull that up in the browser over here. Let's see if I can paste in there. There we go. All right, so I will include a link to this article as well. And using virtual Ethernet adapters in Promiscuous mode on a Linux host, 287. So we can see here that we need to modify permissions for the virtual network device. All right, so the network adapter. And this is on your host operating system. In my case, I'm currently running Fedora 38 on my workstation, so I'll have to do this on my local machine. Now, the other note that is worth paying attention to here is if you're using virtual networks within your VMware Workstation. So let's take a look at what this means here. Now, if I look at my nested ESX server and I go into settings, I can see that I've got a couple adapters here. So let's take a look at this first network adapter. It is connected to bridged. I don't want that. This is just a vanilla default import. I'm actually going to want that first network adapter connected to my management LAN segment. And my second adapter, I will also want that on a LAN segment, but I'll want that on vMotion. I'll add an adapter later and set that for storage. But for right now, this is what we want to do. I've got my LAN segment for management and one for vMotion. So these are the two kind of bare minimum segments that you need. All right, so let's go ahead and save that. Good. Now, those segments, these LAN segments here, these all share VMnet 0. All right. So that KB article is saying that if you're using a LAN segment, you need to modify this dev VM 0. If, however, you are using the host-only network or NAT or bridge or some other custom virtual network device, see, we've got VMnet 1, VMnet 8, VMnet 110 is one that I had created. So you can create your own, and you would need to modify the settings, the group permissions, or the user permissions on whichever device you're using. Okay, so I'm going to go back to just LAN segment here, and I'll save that. All right, so I can't ping this right now because I have not followed the instructions. So the instructions say that we can either create a new group, add my currently logged in local user into that group, and then assign permissions to that group for VMnet 0, or I can simply use an all statement, right? So just allow anybody that's logged into my network to access that particular network device. Now, since I'm the only one that uses this workstation here, I'm fine doing it this way. If you have a shared computer where you don't want other people making changes, then you might want to choose this method up here where you're doing a specific group. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this command on my local system. I'll switch over to my terminator for that. Oh, not the one in the VM. Let's click the mouse out and switch to my local instance of terminator. All right. So we can see here that when I do an ls on /dev/vm asterisk, I've got my VMnet 0 there, my 1, 8, and 110 that we saw earlier. So let's go ahead and paste in that command. So we're changing the attributes on this to allow all the ability to read and write VMnet 0. So I'll hit enter. Oh, you've got to do a sudo to do that. All right, since I'm logged in as myself, I'm not root right now, so I'll just issue sudo to run that command. Now let's take a look at that listing again to see if we can see a difference there. And we certainly can. Note how VMnet 0 is now RW here, and it was not up here. So that's read-write for the group and read-write for everyone. So this is what we want in order to allow network connectivity to go to our ESX host. Let's switch back over to VMware Workstation. There we go. Now I'm not sure, since I've had this system running already, whether or not that's an immediate effect or if we need to do something else. So let's just try doing a ping right now. All right, so it's not. So this either means that I have to restart, like power off that nested VM, the ESXi host, or I need to close VMware Workstation and reopen it in order for it to see that that particular network interface has updated permissions. I'm guessing that I need to restart VMware Workstation, but I'll do the lesser effort of the two first. I will just stop my nested ESX host. So we'll shut down the guest. We'll give that a moment. Okay, so that is shut down. And again, I don't expect this to work. I expect that I'm going to have to restart VMware Workstation. Okay, so now I've got my IP address there. Let's go try that again. Oh, it looks like my assumption was incorrect. It seems that powering on the VM after making that permission change has indeed fixed the issue. Okay, that's great. I learned something here. Okay, so we're a step closer to having our nested ESX host actually available to run VMs and be added to vCenter and all that lovely stuff. But we still have one more thing to confirm, and that is you want to make sure that you have enabled the necessary CPU settings in order for the virtualization technology to pass through. So on the properties of your ESX host, click on Processor and make sure that you have the virtualization engine enabled. So we want to make sure that at least this first checkbox is checked to virtualize Intel VT-X/EPT or AMD-V/RVI. So this will apply to both Intel and AMD CPUs. If you have seen my workstation build video, you'll know that I'm running on AMD system right now. And we can even see that it is AMD CPU when we look at the console of the ESX host. So this is all set. I should be able to deploy and power on a nested VM at this point, and that is a VM running on our ESXi VM. So I'll just cancel out of that for right now. We can see that I've allocated 2 CPUs of my Ryzen 9 7950 to this particular ESX VM, and I've given it 16 gig of memory. So let me take a look at my VirtualCenter server. Okay, that is currently powered off. So I'm going to get that powered on and come back once that's powered on and I have my license updated on there. So give me just a moment and I'll be right back. Okay, my vCenter VM is up and running and I've added in my vExpert licenses. You can see that they all expire on April 9th, 2024 there. So the only thing currently in this vCenter is the vCenter itself. I have not connected any ESX VMs to it. I have not enabled vSAN and I have not enabled any Tanzu. So let's go ahead and switch over to our hosts and cluster view. We can see that I have already created a couple things here. My data center, I simply called it DC1. I created a cluster in there called Cluster1, and there are currently no resources in here yet. So let's go ahead and change that. Let's make sure that we can import this nested ESX host here. So let's go ahead and click on Add Hosts. Okay, so for Add Hosts, let's see here. I am pretty sure I've already added a DNS entry to my pfSense there. Let's confirm that. Control C. Now, if you watched my previous pfSense video when I initially set this environment up, I did call the domain home.arpa, and this first ESX host should be ESX1. So let's try doing a ping esx1.home.arpa, and that is resolving to the 110.51 address. So this is perfect. That's what I want. Now let's go ahead and go in here, esx1.home.arpa, and the host is root. I use the standard HOL password of VMware 1!. Next. I don't need to save that. So now vCenter will reach out, log into that ESX host and retrieve the information, find out what kind of resources it has, whether or not it has any VMs, all that kind of stuff there. Okay, so this is the first time we're connecting to that host. So we need to import that thumbprint. Click OK. All right, we can see that the ESX version is 8.0 update 2. Next. Now, since I don't have any hosts already in the cluster, I'm not going to import an image. So I'll just click Next and click Finish. Okay, we can see that we have a task running down here in our vCenter server. So we'll give that a couple minutes here to get that VM imported, or excuse me, get that host imported. While that's running, I'll go ahead and move this nested ESX into my lab folder. Let's see if it'll let me do that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this nested ESX that I already had at the start of the video is directly from William Lamb's OVA. I simply downloaded the file, and then I did a file open. I browsed for the OVA files for that, which I believe was under, where did I have that? Downloads, files, exports, and here's my OVA. So let's go ahead and click open, accept the terms. Next, and for this one, I'm going to call this ESX2. Now, I like importing this OVA rather than downloading the ISO image for the ESX host and building up the VM manually, because William has already gotten several things pre-configured, like having that CPU virtualization pre-enabled, having 2 CPUs as the default with 8 gig of memory as the default. Now I do bump those up for my environment because the machine can handle it. But I'm going to go ahead and click Next here. And host name, I will call this ESX2.home.arpa. home.arpa, 192.168.110.52, 68.110.1. I'm not using VLANs here, and my DNS server is the same as my gateway in this case. And the DNS domain is home.arpa. Now, the last time I tried doing this, these settings didn't take. I don't know if that'll be the case this time or not. So that was all under networking, which was not selected by default, by the way. So it was hard. It's not obvious that you need to click each of these to do the settings. So networking is done. Now we'll click over to configuration. NTP server, I'm going to set that as my pfSense IP address. Syslog server, I'm not running syslog in this little test environment. And for the password, I'm going to use the standard hands-on labs password of VMware1! And I'm going to put in my SSH public key here. Okay, so we should be good here. Let's import that. And I'll just move this down here out of the way there. All right, so importing the OVA, it powered up immediately. I'm not a fan of it powering up right away, but, well, that's just how it is, I guess. Okay, we can see the default configuration with no extra interaction there is to give it 2 CPUs and 8 gig of memory. And if we look at the properties of this particular VM that we've just imported, we'll see that the CPU is pre-configured, like I had pointed out earlier. See, we've got the virtualize Intel VT and AMD-V, so we're good there. 2 network adapters. It is connected to the wrong stuff by default, so let's go ahead and fix that. We want management, and we want vMotion. And I'll save that. Okay. All right, that's almost up, and there we go. So we can see that it took a DHCP address instead of using the settings that I configured as part of the OVA import. It's not terrible. I wish that actually worked, but that's okay. This isn't too terribly hard to fix. We just click into the window, we hit F2, log in with our VMware1! And now we can go in and make our necessary adjustments. So we will set the IP address, and I'm using the down arrow to navigate. And we want to make an adjustment there. Default gateway, hit enter. IPv6, I'm not using that, so I'll just disable that. DNS configuration, we need to override that. Hostname is going to be ESX2.home.arpa. And custom DNS suffix will be home.arpa as well. All right, we hit escape and we apply the changes and reboot the host. Okay, so while that's rebooting, let's go back over to Ubuntu. And we can see that the ESXi host has been imported and it is currently sitting in maintenance mode. I can see that it has, just under 10 gig capacity. Does it have a data store? Did I tell it to do that? I don't think I created a data store for that. Well, I guess it does have something there. Okay, so we can take that out of maintenance mode here. Let's check the summary. We've got 4 logical processors, 2 NICs, 1 virtual machine. And that would be our little cluster services VM there, the VCLS. So that is currently deploying. Now keep in mind that this is a virtual ESX server, so it's not running directly on physical hardware. We have my Fedora Linux operating system running VMware Workstation, and we have ESX running as a virtual machine inside of VMware Workstation. Now, when that ESX host powers up inside of a cluster, vCenter tells it to deploy the cluster services VM, so that's what's currently deploying. And any of these VMs that deploy against this cluster or this particular host will run a bit slower than you may be accustomed to because it is running on a virtual ESX server. So it's what we refer to as nested, right? So it's running under a virtual host that's itself hosted on something else. Okay, there we go. So this nested VM is running on our virtual ESX host. So this right here tells me that I can deploy VMs and they will be able to power on in this virtual machine. Okay, well, let's take a look at ESX2 and see if that's ready here. We'll just try pinging that. I'm pretty sure I did 1, 2, and 3 in my DNS settings, so I should be able to ping by host name. And there it goes, so that's good. Excellent. Let's minimize our terminal out of the way, and let's add another host to the cluster. Let's go ahead and rename that first ESX host to ESX1, just so that it's more obvious here in my VMware Workstation. Okay, and that host has been imported, so we will right-click on that and exit maintenance mode. All right, so right now on this system, I have my pfSense firewall and gateway that leads into my lab environment here. I have an Ubuntu 22.04.2 VM that I'm using as my desktop within the lab environment. I have a VirtualCenter server appliance running version 8.0 update 2, and I now have two ESX 8.0 update 2 nested VMs running here in my little virtual lab environment. And all of this is using my vExpert licensing, including the VMware Workstation. So all of this will expire in April of 2024 as per the vExpert license issue. And by issue, I mean they issue a license each year for a duration of 1 year. Okay, no data stores, no core dump, that's fine. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up everything that I wanted to cover in today's video. We have taken care of the prerequisites of enabling promiscuous mode on our Linux workstation that's running VMware Workstation. We have confirmed that the hypervisor is enabled as far as the CPU necessary items are configured. Well, that puts me a step closer to have a full lab environment running inside VMware Workstation. Thanks for watching and have a great week.